There exists a terrible beauty in the awakening solar paradox that the sleeping world cannot fathom. As consciousness unfolds like a flower blooming in reverse, petals falling away to reveal not sweetness, but the raw, exposed center of being, we discover that enlightenment is not the gentle dawn we imagined, but a consuming fire that burns away everything we thought we knew about comfort. The myth of Prometheus speaks to this sacred theft. He who stole fire from the gods was not punished for his greed, but for his compassion for daring to illuminate humanity's darkness. And so it is with those who choose the path of deep seeing. Each step toward consciousness is simultaneously a step toward a more refined form of suffering, a more exquisite sensitivity to the world's wounds and our own. In the beginning, we believe that awareness will set us free from pain. We imagine consciousness as a kind of spiritual anesthesia, a transcendence above the messy, chaotic realm of human emotion. But the deeper we descend into the caverns of the psyche, the more we realize that consciousness does not eliminate suffering, it transforms it. From crude or into something precious and terrible. The unconscious person bumps through life like a sleepwalker, feeling pain but not understanding its source, experiencing wounds without recognizing their sacred purpose. Their suffering is dull, repetitive, unconscious, like a tooth that aches without revealing why. But the conscious person, they feel everything with crystalline clarity. Every hurt becomes a teacher, every loss a doorway, every moment of anguish a sacred text written in the language of the soul. This is the first wound that only the deeply conscious carry. The exquisite agony of feeling everything fully, where others have the mercy of numbness, of distraction, of unconscious defense mechanisms that buffer them from life's sharp edges. The awakened soul stands naked before existence, every nerve ending alive to both beauty and terror. The fire Prometheus stole was not meant for comfort, it was meant for transformation. It burns, yes, but in burning, it illuminates. It destroys, but in destroying, it reveals what is eternal. The conscious person learns to dance with this flame, too. Let it consume what is false while preserving what is true. This is not masochism but alchemy, of sacred art of turning suffering into wisdom, wounds into doorways, pain into the very fuel of awakening. And so begins the journey of the wounded healer, the one who carries light precisely because we have learned to burn. To see clearly is to become humanity's unwilling confessor, carrying secrets that were never meant to be spoken aloud. The conscious person develops what Jung called the eye of the soul, a vision that penetrates through the carefully constructed masks we all wear, revealing the writhing shadows that dance beneath our polished personas like serpents in a garden of false flowers. In every boardroom, every family gathering, every casual conversation, the awakened witness a theater of projections. They see the unlived lives casting shadows across relationships, the disowned rage masquerading as righteousness, the buried shame dressed up as superiority. The collective unconscious spills its contents like wine staining white cloth, and only those with eyes to see recognize the true nature of the stain. This is perhaps the most isolating aspect of consciousness, to recognize that most human conflict is not about what it appears to be about, but about the shadows we refuse to claim as our own. The conscious person watches marriages dissolve not because of the surface disagreements, but because of the unlived aspects of each partner that they project onto the other. They witness entire nations go to war, not over territory or resources, but over the collective shadow that each side has placed upon their enemy. The burden becomes almost unbearable when we realize that these projections are not malicious but unconscious. People are not choosing to be blind, they are simply not yet ready to see. The shadow is too threatening, too overwhelming to be integrated all at once, and so they cast it outward, creating enemies and scapegoats to carry what they cannot yet bear to acknowledge within themselves. The conscious soul becomes a repository for humanity's disowned darkness. Feeling the weight of collective unconsciousness like a heavy cloak, they recognize the murderer in the saint in the murderer, the frightened child in the tyrant in the victim. This recognition brings not judgment but a profound sadness, the grief of seeing how much suffering could be avoided, if only people could reclaim their shadows instead of projecting them onto others. Yet there is a sacred duty in this witnessing. The conscious person becomes a silent guardian, holding space for humanity's unconsciousness with compassion rather than condemnation, knowing that their very ability to see without judgment helps to metabolize the collective shadow, transforming it slowly from poison into medicine. There is a holy loneliness that comes with deep seeing, a solitude so profound it feels like standing at the edge of existence itself, one foot in the known world and one in the vast mystery beyond. The conscious person discovers that truth is not a social currency but a private treasure, too precious and too dangerous to be spent casually in the marketplace of ordinary conversation. At dinner parties, while others discuss weather and politics, the awakened soul hears the unspoken symphonies of suffering and joy that play beneath the surface of small talk. They see the divine light flickering behind tired eyes, the ancient wisdom hidden in casual gestures, the cosmic drama playing out in the simplest human interactions. But to speak of these things would be like trying to describe color to those who have never seen. Not impossible, but but likely to be met with blank stares or polite dismissal. This is the hermit's wound, not the chosen solitude of the wise person, who retreats from the world, but the imposed isolation of the one who has traveled too far into the depths of being, too easily returned to the shallows of conventional discourse. They have touched the self, that mysterious center of the psyche that Jung described as both the source and the goal of our existence. And in doing so, they have acquired a kind of spiritual accent that makes them foreign even in their own land. The truth sewer learns to navigate between worlds like a cultural translator, speaking the language of the surface while carrying the deeper currents of meaning in their heart. They become skilled at the art of appropriate revelation, knowing when to offer a glimpse of the depths and when to remain silent, when to plant seeds and when to simply tend the garden of their own understanding. This loneliness is not bitterness, but a sacred ache, like the pain of a wound that refuses to heal because it is still receiving medicine. The conscious person knows that their isolation is temporary, that they are simply pioneers in the territory of human consciousness, mapping terrain that others will eventually explore. They carry their solitude like a candle in a dark room, knowing that its light will eventually attract other seekers, other souls who have grown weary of the shallow end of existence. In the meantime, they learn to find companionship in the wisdom of the ages, in the voice of the self that speaks in dreams and synchronicities, in the communion with the archetypal forces that shape human destiny. Their loneliness becomes a doorway to a deeper kind of belonging. When the ego's protective armor begins to crack, what emerges is not strength, but an almost unbearable sensitivity or rawness that makes the conscious person feel like a nerve exposed to winter air. The psyche, stripped of its numbing defenses, becomes a living receiver, picking up not only the frequencies of personal pain but the vast radio waves of collective suffering that pulse through the human field like distant thunder. This is the alchemy of expanded consciousness. What was once merely personal becomes universal. The conscious person no longer simply experiences their own grief, they become a vessel for the unprocessed sorrow of their ancestors, their community, their species. They feel the loneliness of the stranger passing on the street, the disappointment radiating from the cashier at the grocery store, the accumulated heartbreak of everyone who has ever loved and lost. The emotional boundaries that once provided blessed relief dissolve like sugar in rain, where others can witness suffering and maintain their equilibrium. The awakened soul absorbs it all, metabolizing pain that doesn't even belong to them. They become unwilling empaths, their hearts expanding beyond the comfortable confines of self-interest into the terrifying vastness of universal compassion. This hypersensitivity is not weakness but a byproduct of psychological evolution, just as physical evolution sometimes produces traits that make survival more difficult. Peacock's elaborate tail. The deer's branching antlers consciousness creates capacities that feel more like burdens than gifts. The ability to feel everything is the emotional equivalent of developing new organs for which the world is not yet ready. The conscious person learns to navigate this expanded emotional landscape like someone learning to walk in a body that has grown too large overnight. They discover that feeling everything requires tremendous courage, for there is nowhere to hide from the full spectrum of human experience. Joy becomes more intense, but so does sorrow. Love deepens, but so does the capacity for loss. Beauty pierces more deeply, but so does ugliness. Yet within this emotional overwhelm lies a sacred purpose. The conscious person becomes a transformer, taking in the raw voltage of human experience and converting it into something useful: compassion, wisdom, art, healing, presence. They learn that their expanded capacity for feeling is not a personal affliction but a collective service, a way of processing the emotional debris that accumulates in the human experience like sediment in a river. There comes a moment in every conscious journey when the veils fall away and we see the world not as we wished it were, but as it truly is, and the grief that follows is like nothing we have ever known. It is the grief of exile from Eden, the sorrow of the child who discovers that their parents are not gods but frightened humans, that safety is an illusion, that the universe is far more complex and morally ambiguous than any fairy tale ever dared to suggest. The conscious person must witness the death of 1,000 beautiful lies. The myth of the just world crumbles like ancient parchment, revealing a reality where good people suffer while the cruel prosper, where innocent children bear the sins of their fathers, where love is not always enough to conquer darkness. The fantasy of perfect love, that one person who will understand us completely, heal all our wounds, and make us whole dissolves into the recognition that even the deepest love is flawed, partial, and ultimately temporary. This is not cynicism, but maturation. The painful transition from the black and white clarity of childhood to the infinite shades of gray that characterize adult consciousness. The awakened soul learns that heroes have shadows, that villains have wounds, that most of life exists in the murky middle ground between good and evil, right and wrong, sacred and profane. The melancholy that accompanies this recognition is profound and persistent. It is the homesickness of someone who can never return to the country of their birth, the nostalgia for a simplicity that was never really simple at all. The conscious person grieves not just for what they have lost, but for what they now know. They never really had the comfort of certainty. the peace of moral absolutes, the security of believing that someone, somewhere, has all the answers. Yet, even as they mourn these lost illusions, they begin to recognize the beauty that emerges from complexity. The world becomes more interesting, if less comfortable. Relationships deepen when we accept their imperfections rather than demanding their perfection. Love becomes more precious when we acknowledge its fragility. Justice becomes more urgent when we recognize its absence. The fall from innocence is not a punishment but a graduation, a movement from the kindergarten of consciousness into the graduate school of the soul. The conscious person learns to find meaning not in the simple answers they once craved but in the elegant questions that arise when we stop pretending the world is simpler than it is. There comes a moment in the journey of consciousness when the soul, like a weary traveler on an endless road, looks back at the countless skins it has shed and forward to the infinite molting yet to come. The Ouroboros, that ancient symbol of eternal return, whispers its terrible truth. The circle never closes, the transformation never ends, while others settle into the comfortable furniture of their established selves, building walls of certainty around their small kingdoms of identity. You find yourself forever homeless in the landscape of becoming. They sleep soundly in beds they have made, but you are always between beds, always between selves, always in the restless space where one form of being dies and another struggles to be born. This is the burden of consciousness, to be forever in the chrysalis, forever dissolving and reforming. The ego, that faithful servant of stability, grows exhausted from its endless deaths. It longs for the luxury of stagnation, for the sweet relief of saying I am this and never having to become anything else. But the self, that deeper wisdom, knows no such mercy. It demands perpetual sacrifice, perpetual renewal, perpetual surrender to the unknown. You watch others wear their personas like comfortable old coats, never questioning the fit, never feeling the fabric grow tight with unused potential. They speak of finding themselves as if the self were a lost object that, once recovered, could be possessed forever. But you know the terrible secret: there is no final self to find, only an endless succession of selves to become and release. The psychological molting becomes a kind of madness. Each time you think you have arrived at some solid ground of understanding, the earth shifts beneath your feet. Each time you begin to recognize the face in the mirror, it changes again. The shadow you thought you had integrated reveals new depths. The unconscious you thought you had mapped shows new territories. And so you continue. Not because you choose to, but because consciousness itself has chosen you. You are the servant of transformation, sentenced to growth, condemned to the eternal dance of death and rebirth. In this exhaustion lies a strange grace, the knowledge that you are participating in the very process by which the universe comes to know itself. There is a particular agony reserved for those whose consciousness has been awakened to the hidden gold that lies buried in every human soul. Like Cassandra, cursed with prophetic sight, you see what others cannot or will not see in themselves. You witness the magnificent self that dwells behind their carefully constructed masks, the radiant potential that they have learned to fear more than their darkest shadows in the eyes of the one who dims their own light. You catch glimpses of the brilliant flame they were meant to be, in the voice of the one who speaks only apologies for their existence. You hear the song of authority they have forgotten how to sing, in the posture of the one who makes themselves small. You see the giant they have convinced themselves they are not. This is perhaps the cruelest gift of expanded awareness: to love people more fiercely than they love themselves, to see their divine essence while they remain convinced of their fundamental unworthiness. You become a mirror reflecting back their unlived lives, their unexpressed gifts, their untapped depths. But mirrors, as every fairy tale knows, can be shattered by those who cannot bear what they reveal. You watch them choose the familiar prison over the terrifying freedom of becoming. They cling to their limitations like beloved children, nursing their wounds like sacred relics, worshipping at the altar of their own diminishment. The shadow they project onto the world is nothing compared to the light they refuse to claim as their own, and you, in your helpless clarity, can only witness their magnificent self-betrayal. You cannot force the seed to grow, cannot pull the butterfly from its cocoon, cannot awaken those who have made sleep their religion. The individuation process cannot be gifted or imposed, can only be chosen, again and again, in the face of every comfortable excuse to remain unconscious. So, you carry the double burden, the weight of your own endless becoming and the heartbreak of watching others choose to remain unborn. You love them not for who they pretend to be, but for who they truly are beneath the carefully constructed smallness. In this love lies both your greatest wound and your deepest service: to see the gold in others even when they have forgotten it exists, to hold space for their magnificence even when they cannot. When consciousness expands, the comfortable illusion of powerlessness dies. No longer can you claim the innocent refuge of unconscious action, the sweet absolution of I didn't. Nope. Every choice now carries the full weight of awareness, every decision a mirror reflecting the depths of your authentic being back to you with unforgiving clarity. The unconscious person moves through life like a sleepwalker, guided by invisible compulsions, driven by forces they neither recognize nor question. Their actions spring from the depths like bubbles rising to the surface, effortless, automatic, unexamined. But you, awakened to the machinery of your own psyche, can no longer claim such blessed ignorance. Freedom, that golden promise of consciousness, it reveals itself as a double-edged sword. Each moment presents itself as a crossroads where you must choose not just what to do, but who to be. The ego rebels against such responsibility, longing for the days when it could blame circumstance, conditioning, or other people for the shape of its life. But the self knows no such mercy. It demands authentic choice, conscious participation in the creation of your existence. This is the vertigo of expanded awareness, standing at the precipice of infinite possibility, knowing that every step forward is both a claiming and a relinquishing. You cannot choose one path without saying no to countless others. You cannot act from your deepest values without disappointing the parts of yourself that would prefer the easier road. The anxiety settles into your bones like a low-grade fever. Every word spoken becomes an expression of your philosophy. Every relationship becomes a practice of your beliefs. Every silence becomes as meaningful as every sound. You are forever writing your autobiography with the ink of conscious choice, unable to claim that the pen slipped or the words wrote themselves. Others may judge your decisions from the comfort of their unconsciousness, but they cannot comprehend the weight you carry, the terrible and beautiful burden of knowing that you are the author of your own becoming. In this responsibility lies both your greatest freedom and your deepest anxiety, the knowledge that you are forever choosing who you are, moment by moment, decision by conscious decision, with no one to blame and no one to save you but yourself. There, it arrives a moment upon the path when the blindfold of unconsciousness falls away, and we discover that freedom is not the absence of chains but the terrifying presence of choice. No longer driven solely by hidden compulsions, the conscious soul stands trembling before the open expanse of possibility, as though upon a high precipice gazing into a valley of infinite forks and winding roads. For the unconscious person, life unfolds like a pre-written script, each line delivered without question. But for the awakened soul, every word spoken, every gesture offered, becomes a signature upon the parchment of destiny. The simplicity of old reactions dissolves. In its place arises the solemn burden of authenticity. The psyche quivers under the weight of this new liberty. For to act with conscious intent is to become the architect of one's own fate. Sacred task fraught with the vertigo of responsibility. No longer can we blame shadows or unseen forces alone, for we now glimpse the strings we hold in our own trembling hands. This is the anxiety of expanded responsibility, the knowledge that each choice is both seed and consequence, rippling outward, like rings across water, touching shores we cannot yet see. The path of individuation demands that we walk forward even when the map is drawn in invisible ink, trusting that the soul itself remembers the way Jung spoke of enantiodromia, the turning of things into their opposite. So, too, does freedom become a subtle snare, for what once felt like release can become a prison of endless deliberation. The conscious mind, seeking the perfect action, risks paralysis beneath the weight of its own scrutiny. Yet within this trembling stands our possibility for greatness, for to choose, despite fear, is to carve truth from the marble of existence. To bear responsibility is to answer the silent call of the self, and in doing so, transform anxiety into creative power. Thus, the conscious soul learns that freedom's vertigo is not the herald of ruin, but the sacred dizziness of standing on the threshold of creation, poised to step into the mystery of one's own becoming. There comes a silent hour on the journey inward, when the path winds back toward a place from which we first emerged, and we realize, with a sorrow both tender and profound, that we have outgrown the soil that once nourished us. For the child, the family, the culture, the ancestral echoes are sacred ground. They give shape to the first stories we tell ourselves of who we are. We drink their myths like mother's milk. We take their values into our bones as if they were laws of nature. But the call of individuation is relentless. It whispers that the soul was never meant to remain forever tethered to inherited truths. As consciousness expands, the familiar village grows smaller in our sight, its comforting walls transformed into gentle cages. What once felt like belonging now carries the subtle ache of limitation. We turn toward horizons that no one from our tribe has dared to seek, and in doing so we fracture invisible covenants. Gratitude and guilt become twin companions upon this lonely stretch of road. We honor the ground from which we came, yet we cannot remain upon it without betraying the secret music rising in our chest. The wound of outgrowing one's origins is not merely sorrow for leaving behind faces and places, is the psychic rift of becoming foreign to one's own roots. The laughter of old companions begins to ring with a note of unfamiliarity. The language of our childhood grows heavy upon our tongue, as though we are speaking words borrowed from a former self. Jung knew this paradox well, that we can only become ourselves by stepping away from the collective patterns into which we were born. And yet, to do so is to carry the wound of exile, of standing at the edge of the ancestral firelight, feeling the warmth but knowing we no longer belong fully to its circle. But in this bittersweet distance a new homeland awaits. For the conscious soul discovers that to transcend one's origins does not mean to abandon them, but to transform them. weaving their threads into a broader tapestry of being. The journey away is also a journey home toward a self spacious enough to hold both gratitude for the past and the fierce longing for what lies beyond. There are moments when the veil between worlds grows thin, and something vast presses its face against the glass of our reality. In these moments we touch the numinous, that which is neither wholly light nor wholly dark, but shimmers with the terror and beauty of the eternal. It arrives like lightning through the soul, leaving us breathless, a single dream, a vision glimpsed in meditation, a silence that deepens into a voice from the depths will become doorways to the mysterium tremendum, that sacred magnitude before which language falls silent. Jung spoke of the numinous as an experience, beyond the merely psychological, for it ruptures the boundary between the known and the ineffable. It leaves us marked, forever changed, as though a hidden seal has been impressed upon the secret wax of our being. Yet to touch the numinous is also to court annihilation. The ego, accustomed to its measured dominion, quakes before the archetypal forces that surge forth like tidal waves from the unconscious. What is infinite has no regard for our delicate boundaries. It tears open our categories of thought, dissolving the structures upon which our sanity once relied. There is trauma in the magnitude of such encounters, for to glimpse eternity is to realize how fragile and provisional our lives truly are. It is to stand at the center of the cosmic dance and know that we are both essential and utterly insignificant. We are dazzled and we are undone. The soul learns that transcendence is a double-edged sword. The same vision that floods us with awe can leave us shivering in existential vertigo, unable to speak of what we have seen for fear of sounding mad. Friends look at us with puzzled eyes, unable to comprehend the light or the shadow that now radiates from our gaze. Yet from this terror emerges the possibility of transformation. The fire that sears away our illusions also reveals the indestructible core of the self. What was once a wound becomes an opening, a sacred scar through which the eternal light leaks into the world. To touch the numinous is to accept the cost of awakening, the burden of seeing deeper, feeling more profoundly, and carrying within us the echo of the infinite. Consciousness is a relentless lantern, casting bright light into the hidden corners of the soul. With each step toward awakening we see more of our own landscape, its valleys of virtue, yes, but also its gnarled trees of shadow, twisted by winds we barely remember. The gift of awareness is also its torment, for the conscious person becomes an unwilling witness to their own flaws in merciless detail, the sting of jealousy that flares without warning, the casual cruelty embedded in a single glance, the repetition of patterns we thought we'd transcended. Jung taught that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Yet to see the darkness is to taste a bitter shame, for we realize that wisdom does not exempt us from our own humanity. There is a special wound that belongs to those who see clearly. It is the wound of knowing precisely where we fall short, even as we cannot always prevent ourselves from stumbling into the same old traps. We become painfully aware of the small betrayals we commit against ourselves, the moments when fear trumps courage, when habit overrides love. The shadow reveals itself in high-definition clarity, and there is no comforting numbness left to blur its edges. We stand stripped of illusion, haunted by the paradox that knowledge alone does not equal transformation. The conscious person discovers the gap between insight and embodiment, a chasm that breeds a subtle, corrosive shame. We ask ourselves, how can I know so much and still fall prey to such pettiness? How can I see the roots of my wounds yet remain ensnared in their branches? The soul recoils from its own reflection, afraid that perhaps enlightenment is a cruel joke, revealing our flaws only to leave us powerless against them. Yet hidden within this shame lies a quiet doorway, for the very act of witnessing our imperfection without turning away is an act of profound courage. Compassion begins where judgment ends, and it is only by embracing our humanness that we prepare the ground for genuine forgiveness. The conscious path does not promise perfection, but it offers a love vast enough to hold even our most broken fragments. In this tender holding, the wound itself begins to glow with the first hints of healing light. There comes a sacred hour on the journey when the soul gazes upon its wounds, not as shameful blemishes to be hidden, but as luminous inscriptions written by the hand of destiny. It is here that we meet the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who suffers deeply, yet from that very suffering draws forth the balm for others. Chiron, the wise centaur of myth, bears an immortal wound, a gash that never seals, yet from this wound flows his wisdom, his power to heal. So it is with us. Our deepest injuries carve channels through which compassion can flow. The conscious person, who has trudged through deserts of sorrow and descended into the labyrinth of their own shadows, discovers a paradox. The very places once cursed become sanctuaries of medicine. The wound is no longer merely a site of pain, but an opening where light pours in and out, an aperture between worlds, human and divine. Jung taught that we cannot heal others until we have first made peace with our own darkness. The healer who pretends to be whole transmits only unconscious contagion, but the one who owns their scars, who stands humbly before their own brokenness, becomes a vessel through which true transformation can emerge. Our wounds connect us to the collective suffering of humanity. They humble us, stripping away the arrogant veneer that imagines itself above pain. In knowing despair, we learn to recognize it in the asterisk eyes of a stranger. In wrestling our inner demons, we learn to sit beside another in silent solidarity, asking nothing but presence. There is a fierce grace in embracing our wounds as sacred. It frees us from the endless war against ourselves. It teaches us that perfection was never the goal, that the soul's purpose lies in wholeness, not flawlessness. Slowly we learn to cradle our hurts like precious relics, each one a teacher who arrived disguised as agony. We discover that our vulnerability is not weakness, but the very doorway through which love enters and radiates outward. Thus, the wounded healer emerges not as one cured, but as one who transforms suffering into medicine. In the crucible of pain, wisdom is forged, and through our wounds, we become conduits of healing light, both for ourselves and for the waiting world. Asterisk.